Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of Cosmos Foundation, let me welcome you to this very important event and timely dialogue on the relevance of United Nations for Bangladesh, a prognosis for partnership. I'm Nabila Rahman, and I would like to personally thank each of you for taking the time to attend this very important gathering, especially our distinguished speakers and panelists. It has been very important for Cosmos Foundation to organize a dialogue series as we continue to grow and adapt. Some of you will have attended previous installments on various issues, ranging from relations between Bangladesh and the European Union, Bangladesh and UK, Bangladesh and India, Bangladesh and China, to the Rohingya crisis, to Baul music and philosophy. Cosmos Foundation is always open to new ideas that can help transform society and lead to a better future. And your support along this journey is extremely important to us. So without further delay, let me thank each of you again for enriching the occasion with your presence. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to the chairman of the Cosmos Foundation, Mr. Inayatullah Khan, to deliver the opening remarks. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning. And a very warm welcome to today's event under the banner of Cosmos Dialogue. Understanding through debate is our slogan at Cosmos Dialogue, sponsored by Cosmos Foundation. I can see by this participation of this large audience today, as in the past, that there is an increasing interest among our audience to come and attend these kind of events. Cosmos Foundation is the philanthropic arm of the Cosmos Group. We are trying relentlessly to stimulate the thought and deliberation on the most important topics relevant to our community, our nation, the region, and indeed the world. Each of our events to date, with your support and encouragement, has been a great success. Our media has ensured that our thoughts and voices are spread far and wide. Our seminars and symposiums are matched by publications that have earned plaudits for their quality. It's our wish, indeed our goal, that as Bangladesh continues to march forward, the Cosmos Foundation would aspire to provide the intellectual infrastructure to support this phenomenon. For that is far more sustainable foundation to a nation's growth than what bricks and mortar and steel can ever construct. A mark of our recognition is our collaboration with ISAS, the Institute of South Asian Studies under the National University of Singapore, which is considered as Asia's one of the most prominent and foremost citadel of learning. It is reflected in the fact that most of our events have been chaired by Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chaudhry, our former Foreign Affairs Advisor and currently the Principal Research Fellow at ISAS, a most eminent scholar diplomat in this region. Recently, I was a participant at an important seminar at ISAS in Singapore entitled Bangladesh and UN Peacekeeping, which produced some excellent ideas in the form of takeaways. It is our intention to take these conclusions forward by our focus on the topic at Cosmos as well. This is not just to underscore what Bangladesh does for the UN, but also how a major element of the UN Charter in terms of global peace and stability can be suitably delivered. Indeed, our topic today fits this theme. It is on Bangladesh and United Nations, a prognosis for partnership. The next session of the UN General Assembly is scheduled to commence in the last week of the current month. There will be a powerful delegation representing Bangladesh, which will carry to that august house the developmental and other advances made in Bangladesh under the able stewardship of the Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Also, Bangladesh can and does assist the UN in its bid to secure charter goals and aspirations in its manifold activities. It is our hope that our deliberations here may be viewed as a curtain raiser to our participation in that all-important occasion in New York later this month. I shall risk the accusation of a modicum of modesty by the claim I'm just about to make. It is that very fact that we have such an illustrious global personality to deliver our keynote address is already a measure of our great success. He is someone with an unmatched reputation as a national and international leader and a speaker, Lord George Mark Malloch Brown. He has had an enormously successful career in the United Kingdom, his home, and also abroad. Lord Mark Malloch Brown has been a political journalist at The Economist, a vice president of the World Bank, administrator at the United Nations Development Programme, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, and then at home, a minister at the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Following this very distinguished career, he was created a life peer in 2007. Currently, he still continues to be active in the British Labour Party. It is our hope that in course of his address on the topic of the day, he would also share with us some of his insights on the developments currently unfolding in the United Kingdom, in which I'm absolutely certain our audience is deeply interested. It is also my pleasure and indeed honor to extend a heartfelt welcome in our midst, Mr. M. M. Annan, Member of Parliament, Honorable Minister for Planning. This is particularly so because this is the first time we are having the privilege of his presence and participation at such a Cosmos event. However, most certainly, it will not be the last time, and we look forward to his continued support to our activities. He has an illustrious record of public service, both as an official and therefore as a public person, thereafter as a public person, having had a long and successful career as a Member of Parliament and Minister. With these words, without further ado, I would now request our Chair, Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chaudhry, to proceed with conducting our event. Thank you.
Honorable Planning Minister, Mr. M. M. Annan, my very good friend and dear colleague with whom I have spent several absolutely delightful years filled with incredible memories. Might I add that I would like to congratulate you on your new responsibilities in which you have already shown signs that you'll bring credit and you'll make all your friends proud. Thank you for being here with us. Lord Mark Malloch Brown, our distinguished speaker, who has been introduced, and I'll have a few words to say about him later down the line. Our Foreign Secretary, Mr. Shahidul Haq, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, friends of Cosmos. It's a pleasure, as always, to be back in Dhaka among friends, and also to a Cosmos event hosted by Chairman Inayatullah Khan. His indomitable energy and manifold interests are already talk of the town. From my perch in ISAS, in Singapore, I've been viewing with admiration his relentless efforts in creating that intellectual architecture, infrastructure, that in Bangladesh that you have just spoken of. Such a building, even if it's something of the mind, is a bit like a Gothic cathedral. It's never quite finished, but each little component will provide joy, pleasure, and also a sense of accomplishment, as this event also does. So many thanks, Anai, for organizing this event, and very warm felicitations. Anai has given an excellent introduction to Lord Mark Malloch Brown, and under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have much to add. But there is nothing normal about Mark. And so I feel I should be derelict of my responsibilities were I not to share some recollections from my personal observation of him at work. George Mark Malloch Brown, KCMG of Leonard's Forest in the county of West Sussex. His name is not hyphenated, but his title is. He's obviously a man of prodigious proportions, don't look at his figure, but intellectually. His brilliant mind was shaped at Magdalen College, Cambridge, initially, and sharpened and honed in the School of Life's experience. He has been most things under the sun. A journalist and later tending to refugees during a flamboyant youth, a senior world banker in maturer years, the head of the most important global development agency, the UNDP, and then at the UN headquarters itself. As Kofi Annan's chef de cabinet, I've seen him labor 24/7, tirelessly at getting UN budgets approved. Never an easy task. And then as Secretary General shepherd the Millennium Development Goals, fired and fueled by the spirit acquired as he progressed through his career. Back home, an appointed Privy Councillor and Minister, he earned the wrath of the neocons from across the pond, from across the Atlantic, that is, who called him Saint Mark for his liberal views and also for his principled opposition to the Iraq War. Today, he chairs Best for Britain, a cross-party group, a campaign which believes simply that what is best for Britain is to stay in the European Union. Despite the obvious need for him to be in London as the Brexit crisis unfolds, his presence here shows the best in him, which is really championing the cause of development, of which his love for Bangladesh is a part. So thank you, Mark, for choosing to be with us. While we will doubtless discuss Brexit as we go along, as you have heard, we also want to take advantage of his presence to dwell a while on the United Nations and how Bangladesh need relate to it. The United Nations is a reservoir of humankind's highest ideals. The historian Paul Kennedy has called it the Parliament of Man, an idea he attributed to a rambling work of the poet Alfred Lord Tennyson called Loxley Hill. It is critical for weaker state players like Bangladesh included, to have an international club rules that ask for a global order. The UN tries to do just that. There are many things that Bangladesh sees in the United Nations. Number one, as a protector of sovereignty and provider of security. Number two, as a forum to air views on global issues of importance to us. Number three, as a single platform to relate bilaterally to 192 other countries and saving us costs because it does not require us to open missions and embassies in each of these countries. And fourth, as a source of development support through initiatives such as the MDGs and the Sustainable Development Goals. And finally, as a setter of universal norms values, and standards, including on subjects such as health and disease, food security, and climate change. Bangladesh cannot support it with financial resources. Hence, we make ourselves relevant through participation in such activities as peacekeeping and peace building. Today, the post-war global liberal order is under threat, as is multilateralism and the institutions connected with it, including the United Nations. A world without the United Nations, even if it isn't the parliament of man as once envisioned, is better and safer than a world without it. Dag Hammarskjöld believed that the UN exists not to lead the world into heaven, but to save it from hell. But that is not the reason enough for us not to endeavor to make it better and more relevant. Higher goals for more good calls for greater striving. As the mighty Rabindranath Tagore had simply yet profoundly observed, inspiration follows aspiration. I thank you. Lord Mark Malik Brown to make his remarks. The minister is not. Would you like to speak now? Okay, Minister, we will then we'll be able to let you go earlier. You may wish to speak. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Good morning and Shubha Shakal. Let me begin by thanking Inayatullah Khan and Cosmos Foundation. Louder? Okay. Is it all right now? Yes. Okay. Begin by thanking Inayatullah Khan and Cosmos Foundation for this very interesting and hopefully very productive dialogue. Interesting in the sense that this is an issue of concern to everyone, but very few people really can grasp what it is. The United Nations, its role and relevance, mostly, as you say. Here, apart from Inayatullah Khan, I have to also thank Iftikhar Ahmad Chaudhry, who was my manager, boss, my senior in our offices in Geneva in the 90s. And of course, I have to pay my respects to Lord Brown, who headed UNDP for many years and was a Deputy Secretary General and had a role also in the British politics. I was not aware of that before. I have here our Foreign Secretary, Shahidullah, good colleague of mine, also with us in Geneva, sometimes in the 90s. I have to thank a lot of people here who have been my seniors in public service, Mr. Mukammal Haq, Mr. Inam Ahmad Chaudhry, and I have my two colleagues who worked with me, Sirajul Islam and Shamim, retired ambassadors and foreign secretaries, and of course the distinguished British High Commissioner, Madam. For all of you and others, equally important people, for all of you, my deep respects. Mia, who is heading our UN system here, for you and others, my deep respects. I feel highly honored that Dr. Iftikhar thought me fit to be with you this morning and speak on a matter on which I have very little direct experience, what to talk of studies and research. But of course, as a global citizen, I hope I am now, I do have some ideas about this big organization, the United Nations. And what I say here is I must also admit that I don't speak as a minister, as a citizen, as an informed citizen, I hope, as a conscious global citizen. So my remarks here are absolutely non-governmental, ungovernmental, non-official, it's personal. The United Nations, it grew with me. Almost that we are contemporaneous in that sense. I was born when the UN was born. Now we are together here today. UN had a very patchy start, the bitterness of League of Nations, and then it came into being after the Second World War, if I'm correct, and provided, to my knowledge, the first global platform for the entire humanity, and has provided a vent through which various tensions, various ideas, bitterness, animosities could really be sort of pushed through, brought up into the Security Council, which is the central body, I think, of this UN organization. And although it failed on occasions, but by and large, overall, the score is positive, in my opinion. Particularly, I would like to mention here the post-colonial role of the UN in the early 50s and through 60s in seeing the very large number of countries getting out of the colonial period. They were allowed a place in the global community through the UN. And many of these countries, particularly through the Trusteeship Council, some of these countries could negotiate with their colonial rulers and manage or achieve a decent exit from the colonial days. So that was a great achievement, I think, of the UN system initially. At the same time, the UN also addressed many issues of development, which increasingly became more and more important as times went on. Some of the very important organizations, like the FAO, the World Health Organization, the ILO, were born in the initial days. UNESCO, they contributed tremendously towards building a global human understanding and provided platforms for getting together and sorting out issues, speaking, and clearing out much of the misgivings or much of misinformation that existed on many issues at that time. UNHCR did a tremendous job because of conflicts. Millions of people were uprooted, and UNHCR has been, in my opinion, one of the stellar organizations which has done tremendous service to the needy humanities. Although I should also point out that there are cases of abject failure where the UN failed to address the issues of Palestinians, for example. They've been there living away from their country, from their home, for about 6-7 how many years? 70, 80 years now. And this is where UN, in my opinion, for whatever reasons for you to really think about, the record is not very present. We have benefited from the UN, particularly following our liberation in 1971. During the liberation, of course, we went to the UN, our case went to the UN, we had become part of the geopolitical Cold War issue. It was delayed, but finally at the end of the day, I think our case, the case of liberation of Bangladesh, was positively addressed by the UN. But we got it through our blood, by our sacrifice. And following our liberation, UNROB, UN ROB, many might have forgotten now, UN Relief Operations in Bangladesh, did a tremendous service to our returning refugees from India and to the internally displaced people, providing them immediate food relief, medical relief, and in some cases, building up small infrastructure so that the communities could be connected again. In fact, even before we were members of UN legally, UN ROB, UNROB, was here. United Nations relief operations in Bangladesh. Then the WFP came, and all of this together, in our initial days, the difficult days following our liberation, UN bodies, tremendous help to Bangladesh. So our thanks to them. And as regards relevance, my first answer is that yes, it is very relevant to countries like ours, who sometimes fall into miserable situations because of geopolitical reasons. Although I must add here, some of these very venerable organizations like FAO and WHO and ILO and this, I think they need to be revamped now. Mia is here, she is listening with attention. The times have changed. What was FAO in the 50s, during the days of BRSL, that FAO is no longer relevant to our needs. We need revamped, more advanced FAO, which addresses our present agricultural questions. These are not the old questions of the early 50s. WHO again, ILO particularly, has become a victim of political, what I would say, political difficulties. And ILO has not been able to deliver what it wanted, what it was meant to. But still they continue. UNHCR continues. World Food Program continues. They did a good job here in Bangladesh. So from the point of view of Bangladesh, it is highly relevant that they continue. They are good friends. They provide us a platform through which we can reach the world. With regard to Bangladesh, regard to the present government, we strongly believe in multilateralism. Our foreign secretary here, he can probably delve more into these issues later on when he speaks. We are a people, we are a government, we believe in multilateralism, bilateralism, multilateralism, both. The pillar of our foreign policy, if I understood correctly, has been that we don't consider any country to be our enemy. We consider every country to be our friend. That's very important in the UN context. Unless we accept this and work on this faithfully, UN cannot be what UN is supposed to be. So, from our point of view, UN is a very relevant organization, despite its blemishes and failures, and there's no alternative, what in Bangla called Bikolpo. There is no alternative to the UN at this moment. Alternative is vacuum, which can be highly dangerous, which can be very, very painful to poorer communities, to the less developed countries like ours. So in that context, UN remains relevant. All it needs to be that it has to be updated from time to time. Issues of superpower, super presence, and super application of their right will have to be reviewed. Coming from a less developed country like Bangladesh, this may not be considered by many rich countries or many powerful countries, but that I'm speaking from the heart. Countries like ours, we feel UN has to be what UN was meant to be. Equality, fraternity, friendship of the entire human family, in which we are an equal member. So, Mr. Natullah Khan, thank you once again for asking me to be here this morning, and these were my personal remarks about your issue. Thank you very much. Joy Bangla.
Okay, it's now my great pleasure to invite Lord George Mark Malloch Brown to make his remarks. Mark, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, and it's a great pleasure to be with you all. Thank you very much, Mr. Khan, for the hospitality and sponsoring of all of this, to my friend Ifti Chowdhury for chairing it and inviting me, to the Minister for his attendance here today and gracious remarks, to old friends and colleagues in the room, the High Commissioner, who is a colleague in the British Foreign Office, and Mia Seppo, the UN resident coordinator, who is a colleague of mine in UNDP. So it's nice to be here with friends. Perhaps just two obvious points. I am an ex-UN Deputy Secretary General, so when I speak of the UN, I speak of what I know of it rather than for it. And that is perhaps an important distinction, given some of the sensitive subjects I expect we will touch on before the morning is through. And secondly, on Brexit, I'm more than happy to talk about Brexit, but I think I'm going to leave these first opening remarks to the subject of the UN, and then in the questions we can come back to Brexit, because Brexit has a strange habit of colonizing and taking over everything else. And so the poor UN would be the wallflower left behind if I got started on Brexit. So let me at least start with the United Nations. And I pondered the subject of this seminar with considerable thought and interest, and really conclude that for a country like Bangladesh, there is if you like, comprehensiveness, a totality to its UN relations. And I want to talk about those through four perspectives: Bangladesh in the world, Bangladesh in its neighborhood, Bangladesh's development, and Bangladesh's extraordinary role in UN peacekeeping. And let me start with Bangladesh and the world. If Bangladesh was anywhere else in the world, it would count as a very large country indeed. Its misfortune is to be a 6-footer in a region of 7-footers, which means that it's never quite going to triumph on the sports field in the same way as some others. And having as neighbors China and India, having other very large countries in the region, Pakistan, Indonesia, others, in a sense has for the world not allowed Bangladesh to be seen for what it is, a country of 165 million people, a country, rapidly growing economically, a country shortly to graduate from its LDC status. But in a sense, bigger than the perception issue is the fact that it leaves Bangladesh as one of those medium-sized powers which needs the United Nations as the global guarantor of a system of global free trade, a system of the rule of law, a system where large powers don't just impose their will on smaller ones by virtue of the strength of their military and other might. And so, let me just dwell for a moment on that, if you like, Bangladesh in the world, a country whose growth, which I've already said was remarkable, has depended heavily on an export-oriented model, exporting textiles and other goods to the world. 17% of your GDP now comes from that export sector. But like other Asian tigers that have gone before you, it has required that liberal global trading regime for you to benefit. It's required access to those overseas markets in a low tariff manner. A system which is at the core not just of the post-Second World War order, but at the core of the value system and law-based system that the UN is seen as champion of. But it's not just in something like trade that sort of global rules-based system is so important. Take another equally prevalent issue today of climate. I, as UNDP administrator, knew Bangladesh up close through the issue of annual flooding, and I saw a country which year by year just got smarter and better at its mitigation strategies for managing those floods. But of course, they are not diminishing, and the management of them is highly dependent on neighbors as well. Those rivers that flood into Bangladesh down through the basin our rivers sourced out of India and China, where those countries' approach to deforestation, to dams, to both the use of water and the husbanding of water and the management of water have a critical impact on flooding and climate and environment here in Bangladesh. And so again, it is to the UN that we look for the global management of climate change, a fair burden sharing in a way that doesn't leave smaller, more vulnerable countries behind. And then if you look at the geopolitics, another perhaps the most critical of all dimension, where a UN system of collective security intended to protect the weaker from the stronger and to protect countries from unreasonable demands on them by neighbors. For many years, the most active sort of peacekeeping and security challenges for the UN were in the Middle East and in Africa. But I think we are seeing Asia emerging as a new front line of geopolitical contest. The overarching changing relationship is that between the US and China, as a steady rebalancing of that relationship in favor of China takes place. But you are also living in the shadow of a growing contest between India and China. And if you take more broadly the status of this region, by far the world's largest, you see a process of rapid economic change and urbanization, which is creating new classes of winners and losers across all the countries of the Asian region. And with it, creating new causes of conflict, exacerbated by many of those environmental issues I've already mentioned, with resource constraints of water being greater in this region than in most, with changes in diet leading to new pressures on food supply. And it is in that more choppy, turbulent region and world that a strong United Nations to keep the peace and manage conflict between countries and, when necessary, within countries, is so critical, in my view, to the interests of a country like Bangladesh. Now, let me second turn to the neighborhood. And no country chooses its neighborhood, although the circumstances of Bangladesh's birth as a nation, very much was a reflection of the difficulties of this neighborhood of yours. Nobody chose that you would have, on the one side, India with increasingly difficult relationships with some of its minorities, of which the issue of Assam is now, bursting into view for all of us. But secondly, the tragedy of the Rohingya from Myanmar. Bangladesh has got one of the greatest population densities of any country in the region, and yet it finds itself the home to refugee populations. And this is a great test of the values of a country, its ability to deal with this in a wise and just and human way. And you look at the issue of the Rohingya and see the difficulties of repatriation programs when the government in Myanmar is felt to still not acknowledged the original sources of the exodus, let alone redress them to a point where it would encourage return. And one can understand the frustration amongst Bangladesh citizens at this unanticipated burden on your economy. And I know the great strains and stresses on services and the economy in the Cox's Bazar area that this influx has caused. And I, who began my professional life working for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and served intensively in Asia and initially in Thailand, where there was a similar unanticipated influx from Cambodia across the border into Thailand, saw these same, if you like, sort of episodes play themselves out of initially warm humanitarian reception of refugees, followed by increasing frustrations and difficulties at the local community level, which in turn fed into national politics as the government began to realize that this was a burden of some duration and length. Although now, like so many refugee problems, one solved, with no refugees left, all having returned or gone on to resettlement in other countries. So I suppose message one is these problems can for a time look quite overwhelming, but their solutions do finally become arrived at. But the second message is it is not for any European to lecture Bangladesh on its responsibilities or issue of conscience around refugees. Europe has betrayed its own standards on this in a dramatic way in recent years, and still has paid a very high political cost. The politics of Germany, Italy, arguably the whole of Europe, have been turned on their head in part by the initial generous reception of refugees by Germany, and then subsequently Europe throwing up barricades against refugee entry from Syria and Northern Africa. So what I say to you about displaying generosity in your treatment of refugees is not based, if you like, on sort of European morality of any kind at all. It's based on the appeal to the interests of a country that wants to be a well-regarded leading member of the international community, a voice and force at the United Nations. And the set of relationships which allow you to be such in the UN are relations of give and take. On some areas like the environment and climate, you look to your neighbors to help you by modifying their own behaviors. On others, you find yourself needing to lead the global response and demonstrate the values of the Charter and of international refugee law. Let me turn to my third area, development. And, you know, again, praise a country that when Ifti and I first knew each other, when he was ambassador in Geneva, the country's graduation from its LDC status looked much longer in the future than has been the case. And this has reflected the dramatic economic success of recent years here. But what it does mean is a transition in terms of your international development assistance relationships, already underway as the World Bank has already upgraded your classification, but with the UN system as well, post 2024. And it also, just losing that status is one step on the path of development, and in fact, you know, leaves you with really major issues for which I hope the international community can be an ally, a provider of advice, of technical assistance, and of still significant loans and grants. And the issues I would just quickly tick off are issues of inequality here, that, you know, Oxfam, I think, reports that you have, you know, the highest number of dollar billionaires in the region, but you are still a country where the environment, for example, in addition to the flooding issue I spoke of earlier, is eating away at your coastal communities with salination and rising sea levels, leading to a massive displacement of people coming in to cities like Dakar because their livelihoods in the rural coastal areas are no longer viable. And that, of course, contributes to increasing income inequality. So your development journey is, in that sense, by no means finished. the need for a development strategy that generates good jobs and opportunities for a growing youth bulge is critical, as is the need for the investment in education to allow that youth to go with Bangladesh in its journey, up the economic order, so to speak, to more complex models of manufacturing and service provision in the future. And another issue of development which is critical, and I say this as someone who is head of UNDP, has seen pretty much every model of development there is out there. Critical to any successful sustainable model is sufficient room for civil society. And again, this is one of Bangladesh's global points of leadership. No other country has generated a pair of organizations like BRAC and Grameen. These have been models for service provision, for microfinance, for innovation in the delivery of civil society development programs the world over. And, increasingly one sees BRAC now operating in many other countries around the world, Afghanistan, countries in Africa, etc. And so there is a great role of civil society in Bangladesh, but it's a need to make sure that that includes the adequate space for political debate and political debate about development priorities. It means ensuring that social problems which are not at all unique to Bangladesh, you only have to see the demonstrations in South Africa over the last week against violence against women to know that this is an issue across pretty much the whole of the developing world. And Americans and Europeans would argue in different forms very much an issue in those countries as well. So issues of this kind need to be attended to and thought about in a serious development model as you move forward. And let me just say that, I know there is now work on the 8th five-year plan. There is the newly constituted UN cooperation. It used to be called something else. It's now called a UNSCDF. But perhaps, above all else, there is the global solidarity of which Bangladesh is so much part around the SDGs. Ifti mentioned my role in the MDGs, their predecessors, but what these have created is global goals which allow us to feel part of a global development effort where we, are beginning to have the comparative data to see how different countries are prioritizing between education and healthcare and job creation. But also we have a global conversation about the comprehensiveness of development, that you need to do so many different things and attend so many different priorities to build the right kind of society for the future. And so Bangladesh, with its economic success, with its extraordinary ambassadors, civil society ambassadors of BRAC and Grameen and others, is a major voice in that debate and should be heard in New York and elsewhere for that. And then let me just turn finally to the fourth area I mentioned at the beginning of Bangladesh and peacekeeping. You've been in the top 5 peace contributors in countries for the last decade or so. You, I think, still have around 8,000 peacekeepers out there, and you've had 83,000 Bangladeshis serve across 45 missions during the life of UN peacekeeping. And I think I don't need to rehearse to you the advantages that has brought, the soft power advantage, the advantage of your military working shoulder to shoulder with colleagues from India and Pakistan, and the relationship building that creates with consequences for your own regional relations back home. The impact on training and equipment that this allows for Bangladesh, where I know you now have the Bangladesh Institute of Peace Support training, and of course a significant financial benefit of some $300 million annually in both wages to the troops, but also overheads to the military. And you do this at a time where the complex model of calculating contributions to UN peacekeeping, which combines per capita income along with overall GDP numbers, means that some of the very smallest UN countries, San Marino, for example, with a population of 33,000, contributes more financially to peacekeeping than Bangladesh does. But as I say, you make up for that as an extraordinarily generous troop contributor, and that has always been the model, that those who can contribute financially do, those who are willing to offer troops and other support provide that critical in-kind contribution to effective peacekeeping. And peacekeeping, though, and I think I do have to warn you this, is as I suspect everybody in this room is aware, is something going under a lot of transition. First, you've had the Trump administration demanding less of it, so that the budgetary cost to the US is reduced. We've seen, both operations in Haiti and West Africa closed. We see, some rugged holders on like Mali and the Congo in Africa. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was in the Congo this week, and pledged again to the new leadership there, President Tshisekedi, to keep up the momentum of UN peacekeeping in the Congo. But I think the writing is on the wall. There are very unlikely to be new large missions of the kind that we have seen in the past in Middle East and Africa. And this, is for a number of reasons. The sort of thin blue line concept of keeping the peace between countries had already been overtaken by reapplying that thin blue line to inside countries like the Congo or Mali to try and keep warring parties from each other's throats. And increasingly it's seen that UN peacekeeping rarely has, the nimbleness or air power to operate effectively in some of these difficult new contexts. And so UN peacekeeping is very much, I think, under review, with a sense that past missions have been too ambitious for the budgets allowed them, and that there's got to be a cutting of the cloth to more realistic ambitions. And that, above all else, we're going to see a much greater focus on mediation rather than peacekeeping. The Secretary General has reorganized his two departments of political affairs and peacekeeping to try and semi-combine them in order to prioritize mediation before you arrive at peacekeeping. And where there is peacekeeping, I think we're going to see, either regional organizations taking the lead, like as happening in, for example, Somalia, with just the sort of back office and logistics functions being provided by the United Nations. And that does raise the question of, if there are such peacekeeping operations in the future in Asia, what is the equivalent of the African Union? Because this is a region which has not developed strong regional institutions in the same way that Africa has been lucky enough to do. And we're likely to see more specialist missions. So, people think it very unlikely that Syria or Yemen or Ukraine, to take the three big conflicts of current times, would ever have large UN peacekeeping missions. But what you saw, for example, in Syria was a very successful UN OPCW, which is the Chemical Weapons Convention, joint mission to monitor the use of chemical weapons. In Yemen, you see a small UN team monitoring the so-called Stockholm Agreement. So I think there will be more smaller, lighter, specialist missions, but that obviously has consequence for the model of peacekeeping that Bangladesh has until now supported. I think the big question, and it will be a highly and has always been a highly controversial question at the UN, is whether or not there will be greater counter-terrorism capacity built at the UN to deal with groups who are just outside the political pale of organized global political life. And you know, there is a lot of anxiety politically around this, a fear that, you know, the UN might, as it did in Iraq, appeared to somehow be aligned with the United States in a way that led to our headquarters being bombed there in 2003, but where, you know, in truth, the UN had resisted that conflict mightily. But to terrorists, those distinctions often get lost. So, you know, would a UN that was willing to take on counterterrorism operations become a more militarized UN, unable to carry out its development missions and losing the confidence of a minority perhaps, but often key states who might not accept the premise that particular groups were terrorists. So, you know, there's a lot in the peacekeeping field to be reviewed. I think perhaps one last observation is that there's been a recent report on, Crew's report on the security of UN peacekeepers, which has made a lot of sensible recommendations about how to better protect them, to have a better duty of care towards peacekeepers deployed in the field. And that's good news for Bangladesh, whose soldiers have fallen in the line of duty in Congo and Bosnia and elsewhere. So that is, you know, a key improvement that I hope will come. So what I've described is a Bangladesh which has a whole set of relationships with the UN around global issues, regional issues, around development issues, around peacekeeping. And the proposition I want to make to you all is that you can't separate one out and drop your responsibilities on one and expect somehow to sustain your influence and standing on the others. This is a chair with 4 legs. Don't take one of the legs away. So difficult though the burden is on the Rohingya, and difficult though the burden is of your location with, as I say, Assam and other problems ahead, I think a critical bit of Bangladesh's soft power of its global leadership comes from handling these problems with patience and humanity, whatever the difficult political challenges it generates at home. And so let me just say, because I do want to echo what the minister said, you know, this is not at the moment the best of times for the United Nations. I think he's quite right that various of its agencies could do with a serious reboot and refreshing in terms of the effectiveness of their offering to, you know, a country like Bangladesh. But much more profoundly, the UN has always been a, you know, victim of interstate politics going on around it. It is never free of them. A great Secretary General can get a step ahead, but then the tide turns on him. And having worked arguably for the greatest Secretary General of the UN's time, Kofi Annan, I know that very well. He was always using the phrase in his soft, gentle voice that you cannot change the wind, but you can bend the sail. And his point was that the leadership of the UN has always been the art of the possible. The minister referred to it with Hammarskjöld's even more famous phrase about the UN is not taking you to heaven, but it's saving you from hell. And we are in a period, let's face it, of dramatically difficult international relations. We have a rising bilateralism and nationalism across many countries in the world, and particularly across some of the world's largest countries. China, India, United States, Brazil, I can name them. We have this rebalancing of power between the US and China, for which the current front line is Asia itself. We have a Europe in crisis, of which Brexit is one of the most extreme dimensions, but where, you know, politics in Italy and Germany and elsewhere, you know, demonstrates that the crisis is broader than just a typical bit of British eccentricity. This is a much profounder crisis of Europe which is underway. This has had the effect of freezing the effectiveness of the UN in many ways. It has been one of the worst periods of the UN Security Council that I have seen in years in terms of its ability to agree on approaches to different conflicts. So while we have a great UN leader in Antonio Guterres and in the team around him, these are people hamstrung by the geopolitical environment in which they must operate. Always, at times like this, when the big powers are locking horns, it is to the middle powers that the UN turns. The Swedens and many others in previous times have been critical bulwarks of UN effectiveness when the P5 were distracted by their own conflicts. My prediction is that in this difficult period for the UN, it will be a new coalition of countries, not so heavily European as in the past, but global, countries such as Bangladesh, which will recognize their shared interest in ensuring not just the survival of the UN and its rule of law and values-based systems, but the rebooting of the UN to make sure that as its clients, you are getting effective services from it. So my appeal to you all is not just to look at the UN as somehow a passive, slightly dated partner, the elderly aunt in the family, but to look at the UN as a source of dramatic dynamism if it can be unleashed, and to realize that Bangladesh's time has come. It's for countries like Bangladesh who are in the front line perforce because they are hosts to refugees, because they are contributors to peacekeeping, because they are living out the challenges of modern economic and social development in real time, that it is for countries like Bangladesh to step forward and make the UN work for these different new times we live in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Very well spoken. It was a huge challenge given you, actually, to encapsulate your experience in 40 minutes, not just the experience of the UN, but also to give a tour d'horizon of the challenges that the UN itself faces, not just a passive partner of member states. You spoke of I thought you did it brilliantly, the responsibilities of member states like Bangladesh, not to emphasize all the stools or legs of the structure of the UN at the same time, and not to emphasize one in order to de-emphasize the other, and that kind of thing. And for Bangladesh to use, or countries like Bangladesh to use its soft power with patience and humanity, which is enable us to reboot the United Nations to react to our contemporary times. There are times when you very well said that UN depended on middling powers like the Swedens, etc. But this is time for a new coalition, and you think very aptly so that Bangladesh is a part of it. I will now open the floor for interactive discussion. We have to be a bit strict about the rules, by the way. When you are recognized, you will give out your name for our record, and also affiliation, if there be any. I mean, if you are speaking, if you're a member of a university, think tank, government, civil society, or private sector. I mean, I wouldn't recognize everybody around the room, though I'd very much like to. Mr. Anathal Khan will assist me in all this, I'm sure. And 3 minutes each. Make your intervention, ask your questions, but at all times, confine yourselves to 3 minutes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is open. I recognize Ambassador Sirajul Islam.
Sound that's it.
There are three microphones. It will be taken
Yeah.
to you. If you raise your hand, keep raising it till the microphone reaches you.
Can I be heard? I don't know if it's working. It's working? Okay. My name is Sirajul Islam, Muhammad Sirajul Islam. I'm a retired ambassador. My last posting was in Japan. I retired from there in 2006.
Speak a little louder.
Little louder, okay. Little closer, okay. I'll try my best. So, the address that the main speaker gave was brilliant, and it gave us a lot of optimism, because he told us that Bangladesh is on the threshold of becoming a power, like Sweden was in the time of UN crisis. Countries like Bangladesh came to the forefront, like Sweden came to the forefront, and Bangladesh is perhaps on the cusp of playing such a role in the United Nations. But having said that, having raised optimism amongst us, the other thing you said is about the UN peacekeeping. In Bangladesh, UN peacekeeping is not only something very important in terms of our role in the United Nations, it's also very important in the context of our politics. So whatever is said about Bangladesh and UN peacekeeping is seen with different glasses. So one of the glasses that you said, and from where I'd like to take a little bit of caution, is the system is on reform. I mean, there's reform going on, and we think of UN peacekeeping as money coming in cash to the Bangladesh army, keeping them happy. But if this is happening or not, I don't know. From what you said, what is happening, and they don't get the drift. Having said this, having raised the optimism, I was just reading a newspaper report that came out 3 days ago from another minister of ours, like the minister sitting is a friend of mine. This minister is the foreign minister, who is also a good friend of mine. But the optimism that you raised about Bangladesh, and the title of the seminar today, Relevance of the United Nations for Bangladesh, a prognosis for partnership. But the Honorable Minister for Foreign Affairs, in the context of the Rohingya crisis, has more or less demolished any sense of optimism that we may have had, because he blamed the United Nations fair and square for the Rohingya crisis that is now in our midst. We have 1.2 million Rohingya refugees, and the Rohingya women who were in the camp for the last 2 years have added, according to the agencies working there, maybe 100,000 or 200,000 refugee children have been born in the camps in the last 2 years. And as I don't know where I read somewhere, or maybe I think somebody said that the refugees are still coming. The refugees are still coming. And in the last 2 years, despite the fact that they're sponsored by the Chinese, we have an agreement with Myanmar for sending the refugees back. 2 weeks ago, under that agreement, the buses were ready, but not one refugee agreed to go back, because nobody wants to go back to die. So what has the United Nations, which has a role in the Rohingya crisis, because this is an ongoing genocide that is going on. Our Prime Minister said it's a genocide, and it has been accepted all over the world. It's a genocide. When a genocide is happening, and the United Nations, which is, as the Minister for Planning has said, its role is the alternative to the United Nations. And that United Nations has been sitting with its thumb in its mouth. Because if the refugees are still coming back, it is ongoing, genocide, and the United Nations has not been able to do anything to send one refugee back to Myanmar. Okay. Now, my question to the main speaker and to others, because I also see the foreign secretary in one corner, is are we in some sort of conflict with the prognosis given by the principal speaker, which is a very optimistic one, against the prognosis given by the foreign minister, which is extremely pessimistic? This is an antithesis.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Shamim Ahmed.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks to Lord Malik Brown for his excellent presentation. My name is Shamim Ahmed, as it has been stated. I am a former ambassador, and one of my previous assignments was as Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, when you, Mr. Malik Brown, used to be heading the UNDP, possibly, yes. My question, I've got two questions. The first one relates to Rohingya. I would pick up from what Ambassador Siraj Islam said, but it would relate more to Myanmar's role. how do you think the United Nations can play a proactive and effective role in finding an enduring solution to this Rohingya issue? Because it's been happening. It's been coming to Bangladesh for years now. It started back in 1978. And now we are in a situation we are having to grapple with this serious problem of dealing with 1.2 million Rohingya refugees, which has kept on increasing as elaborated by Ambassador Sirajul Islam. How can UN really help? And the second one is, it relates to the UN peacekeeping. We all know that Bangladesh is one of the leading troop contributors. It keeps alternating between first, second, and third positions. I feel, I've served there, that Bangladesh's contribution to the UN peacekeeping is not legitimately reflected by Bangladesh's representation on the senior position with the UN Secretariat, particularly in the DPKO. Don't you think that Bangladesh should have more representation at the senior level in DPKO? Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, would you like to take two? And Foreign Secretary, you are free to jump in anytime you choose to. Thanks.
Well, if you say, would I like to take those two questions? I'm not sure the word is like, but I will take those two questions. Look, on the Rohingya, I don't mean to sound, optimistic. What I said was that it requires a great depth of patience and humanity on Bangladesh's side to manage this issue, because a refugee population of that size in the part of the country where they are is a huge burden. And I've said that and I repeat it. I don't disagree with the assertion that not the UN, but that states have not been forthcoming with the political pressure on Myanmar to arrive at a solution. I think we all understand the politics of Myanmar, where, frankly, the military hold the upper hand, and the pride of Aung San Suu Kyi has meant that she has defended their actions in ways that many of her friends and fans abroad hoped would not be the case. But I think she's wanted to preserve, frankly, the fiction that she's in charge. And, I think it's pretty clear that this is, a military-led initiative in the country. And, it reflects, a deep pathology in Myanmar towards minorities. And, I have known Myanmar for many years, and I've known Aung San Suu Kyi for many years. And, it is to me just profoundly depressing that this country, which seemed to be the latest and one of the most exciting new global democracies, has, generated this refugee exodus. Getting its politics changed to make Myanmar a sort of more tolerant, multicultural society, reflecting the genuine ethnic diversity of its citizenship, is clearly not going to happen overnight. There's a lot of political change that has got to occur in the country. And there's got to be a lot of international pressure brought to bear to secure that change. And that's why I appeal to Bangladesh for patience, because there isn't going to be a solution. And I think this fact that, a properly organized repatriation initiative a few weeks ago didn't produce a single repatriant, shows the gulf between the protection and economic arrangements for return in Myanmar and the needs of people to go back. But, I think it is reasonable to say that the, very difficult, squalid conditions of this huge refugee population, squalid despite the best efforts of Bangladesh and the international agencies supporting it and the Bangladeshi ones, just because of sheer numbers, means these are not refugees who want to stay. they want to go home, but the conditions have got to be created to enable them to do that. And so, you know, this is a classic dilemma of refugees, and whether it was refugees in Europe after the Second World War, refugees in Southeast Asia after the Indochina War, or today the Rohingya here, the reality is these problems don't lend themselves to quick fixes. It is a steady problem to get there. And I, you know, really, you know, the UNHCR representative is here and he can probably address better than I can current UN efforts to solve this. But I would plead with you not to believe that somehow the UN is asleep at the watch on this one, or it understands the frustrations here and the need to find solutions, and I think wants to work with Bangladesh in this coming session of the UN General Assembly to make sure this issue gets the political prominence it needs to begin to move towards a solution. Let me take the other issue you both touched on just very quickly, the UN peacekeeping one. You know, I think, you know, in a sense, all I can do is warn you that the nature of peacekeeping is changing, and it's very important for Bangladesh to kind of make sure that it refreshes its offering to mix that. Now, look, you know, Bangladesh, for example, deployed the first ever all-female unit of peacekeepers to Haiti, which was very necessary, where there was a lot of sort of sexual violence, gender violence, and where an all-woman peacekeeping unit would have a trust and confidence that in that tragic situation men wouldn't have had. So, you know, Bangladesh is on the front foot on this. It understands the changes that are taking place, but it's just got to continue to innovate and follow the changing needs closely, because, as I say, it's my prediction there won't be big classic operations of the kind we've seen in the past. The ones that are left will take a long time to close, but I don't see the numbers dramatically increasing.
Thank you. Mark, I entirely agree with you, with your summation. Actually, towards the end, the question raised by Shamim was on, by the way, on participation in peacekeeping. Now,
Staffing.
Yeah, staffing. But, yeah. Okay. I mean, we have got some commands, as you know. We've got Cote d'Ivoire, we've got Liberia. But more important, I think, is the role of countries like Bangladesh in the mandate making. I mean, the problem is we don't have enough say when the mandates are created in the Security Council. I mean, you're just there to police, but you're not the magistrate making the laws or giving the legal instructions. So that is where you need some more input from participating countries. Of course, as Mark said, that we have evolved. I mean, peacekeeping is something that's evolving. We've gone into peace building stages, which means we would foresee eventually in the future many civilian participation. There's already 3 generations of peacekeeping. There will probably be a 4th generation where you'll need teachers, women, workers, social workers, etc., going into participating in the peace building efforts. I will recognize 2 now from the floor. Masood Khan first, and Ambassador Tariq Karim thereafter. Masood.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Masood Khan, and I'm the Deputy Managing Director of Cosmos Group. Thank you for your excellent remarks, Lord Malik Brown. Both you and Ambassador Iftikhar Chaudhry have stated that the global multinational system is currently under threat. What can developing countries like Bangladesh do to support it, strengthen it, and ensure its survival at this time? In fact, is it possible to do it? Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Tariq Karim.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, my compliments to Lord Malik Brown for a very comprehensive presentation, covering very many points of relevance to Bangladesh as well as the international community. I would like to, if you'll permit, nudge you a little out of the comfort zone of the relevance of United Nations for Bangladesh and extend that field a little. what we are witnessing today is a great churning around the world. And this is reflective of what I think is a sort of insurgency against the established order. That was the established order that was put in place after World War II. If I may, and you'd probably be able to comment better on this, the present churning in Britain over Brexit is not dissimilar to that. And it's when this new generation, this is the fourth generation after World War II, which has come of age, they think differently, the values are different, the perspectives are different, the perceptions are different. The order put in place by the forefathers or grandfathers has not delivered to them what they think they need. Where is this going to lead to in terms of the future of the United Nations? I mean, you've commented Bangladesh, and I thank you for the compliment, that we have shown remarkable patience. But patience is like an elastic band. It has its limit of elasticity. What happens when that band stretches too far and bursts? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, look, thank you. Both very good points. I mean, first on the how to support the international system, and in a way it leads on to the second question. You know, it's an effective international system is, as you both imply, going to look very different from what it used to look like, because it's a changed constituency out there in terms of what people want from it, and the kind of creaking intergovernmental structures dominated by the P5, dominated by, if you like, old Europe and you know, some of the sort of original 48 founding members of the UN, is going to, you know, and UN is going to look very different, because it's going to represent this, you know, much more, if you like, global rainbow of interests and issues and peoples than the original UN did. And, you know, part of that will be more Bangladeshis in senior positions in the organization, as of people from many other of, if you like, the newer powers. But I suspect it will also be a UN which will actually have quite a lot, and this is more controversial, bigger place in it for civil society. Because I think, you know, the idea of a UN as just an interstate organization is one of the rigidities which make it so handicapped in dealing with the challenges of today. If you, for example, take refugees, which has been such a theme this morning, an awful lot of the best work on solutions to refugee problems, on the sort of mediation of conflicts which generate refugee problems, on service delivery for refugees, is taking place in civil society rather than within governments. So, you know, I think an effective UN needs to kind of open up the windows and doors and let a much wider range of both state voices but also non-state voices to be part. And secondly, it has to sort of resources are not limitless, so it needs to be disciplined about phasing out activities which are no longer relevant and building up activities which are critically relevant. So, you know, if you take the whole issue of the environment, for example, you know, there have been one or two spectacular issues like the Montreal Protocol, barely known, but which has done dramatic things to change ozone related environmental crises around the world. We need to build up the whole of the environmental side of the UN to be able to much more effectively deal with new world problems. And, you know, we need to build a much more modern form of political mediation to deal with conflicts within and between states in a way that states which are very prickly about national sovereignty and non-interference will accept. And so, you know, the challenge of UN renewal is, I would say, an extremely profound one. And I'd just say that, it's not obvious that it happens. I think there is a great complacency in the UN. There's a sort of feeling it's been around forever, it'll go on. Well, in the great sweep of things, it's only 75 years old. And, the League of Nations made nowhere like 75, but I bet, if 20 years into the League of Nations, people had said, you're not going to be around forever, they would have been astonished. They built this massive League headquarters in Geneva. They thought they'd change the world. So I think for the UN, the stakes are extremely high, actually, that unless it can show itself relevant to today's problems and offer solutions that a new generation of leaders find appealing and persuasive and useful, then the UN will suffer probably not instant death, but steady decline and irrelevance.
Thank you. I have now three speakers on my list. Could I take three, Mark? I have Mr. Junaid Chaudhry, Salim Chaudhry, and Mr. Mukammal Haq. I'll give them the floor in that order. Junaid Chaudhry first, Salim Chaudhry, Mr. Mukammal Haq.
Well, you already know my name is Junaid Chaudhry, and I am a retired oil company person. Happens to be a British company, Shell, the British Shell oil company. Yeah, okay. So I have a small comment and a question. The comment is about this, what Ambassador Karim mentioned, that patience has also got a limit. Now, we have been, this Rohingya issue has been only about 2 years. United Nations, UN has been involved 2 years. And it seems that within these 2 years, we're already becoming uncomfortable. Now, I was wondering what is the reason. I don't know really, because I'm not in it. I was thinking whether it's a cultural one, you see, whether we are seeing too many bikinis on the beach in Cox's Bazar, which we don't like. That's one comment. And the question is about the length of the peacekeeping. It's not about Bangladesh, but on the other side of the subcontinent, we have the Kashmir line of control. And it's been probably about 70 years they've been there, the United Nations. Now, what peacekeeping have they been doing? Have they fired a single shot in the 70 years? I mean, the actual fighting or the cross-border fighting goes on, shelling and all that, and they just watch. I mean, couldn't we just withdraw them tomorrow and say that you two countries, you look after your own border? Now, they don't want to call it a border because it's disputed. They call it line of control or whatever you call it. But it is your border. You have the North Korea and the South Korea, the demilitarized zone. The respective armies are looking after the border. What is 70 years, a lot of money been spent in, is India and Pakistan bearing the cost of this, or is it the United Nations bearing it? That's my question.
Thank you. Salim Chaudhry.
Thank you, Dr. Chaudhry. I have a question for Minister Mannan and the Foreign Secretary. And the Foreign Secretary, I think he's here, Mr. Haq. It's about the NRC in Assam. And yesterday, the State Minister of Finance of Assam said that there is about 1.5 to 1.6 million Bangladeshis staying there. And since Bangladesh is a good friend of India, they would request Bangladesh to take these people back once the process is finished through the Supreme Court and High Court and the whatever. My question to both the Foreign Secretary and to the Minister is that if that happens, and at one point in time they want to push or request in the sense, it's a request to take, then what are you going to do? Number one, are you keeping the United Nations informed about the situation? so that it doesn't come as a bolt from the blue to the United Nations or to the other agencies, because you have Rohingyas in hand, and as it apparently looks, they are not going to go back in very near future. So you have 1.6 million people coming into Sylhet or wherever from Assam. How do you tackle all this situation? Is the world body informed? Is the world body and the world informed about it officially? Everybody knows it though. And I would expect an answer from the Foreign Secretary and then from the Minister.
We have two questions. First one from Junaid Chaudhry, you probably have registered. And thereafter, on Salim Chaudhry, could I ask Minister, you to go first, and Foreign Secretary thereafter? On Salim Chaudhry's issue, but Mark might want to respond to Junaid Chaudhry.
Well, let me then quickly do that.
you.
Okay.
And very quickly on Kashmir, this is a UN observer mission of very limited capability and role, because India has always insisted that it won't allow an internationalization of the Kashmir problem. What I would say is I was in the UN at the time when this dispute briefly almost went nuclear, and to watch the role of Kofi Annan as Secretary General at the time, along with the then American President and the British Prime Minister, the three of them being incredibly actively involved behind the scenes in trying to sort of talk down the two sides. It leaves one, in a sense, despondent at the absence of people who can today exercise that similar role of talking down these two leaders, Mr. Modi and Imran Khan, because so far so good. They have, for their own reasons, not allowed the thing to escalate further. But the fact is, for 70 years, there's been a general refusal to let an international presence lead to some kind of mediation and solution. There is now not even the international capacity in the world's leading capitals to deliver mediation help, even if it was asked for. So I think Kashmir is an extraordinarily serious, high-risk problem at the moment.
Minister, would you like to... You could take on Kashmir also if you like. I don't think you will.
Both are very hot potatoes, but anyway, thank you. No, friendship is eternal, we think. And there are moments there can be friendships, there can be issues, irritations. These will have to be addressed in the context of long-term friendship, number one. The case of Assam, that's something they're doing within their country based on their own laws. It's not extrajudicial anything. It's not a war situation. Within the laws of the Indian constitutions and the local Assam legislature, they've taken some actions. It is still developing. We know there can be issues which may affect us in due course. But let us not be presumptive. As I said, friendship is much more valuable than these small-time irritation. I think we can address those later. The point is, it's still developing. It's too early, but Shahidul is here, our Foreign Secretary. He can probably give better answer on behalf of the government. I myself think that we should let it develop a little more and then maybe address it with our neighbors where the issues are developed, number one. Kashmir is a matter of a different nature. What they have done is my views again. Shahidul can give the government view later. How they are doing is addressing the issue of Article 370 within their own constitution. They have gone to the Lok Sabha, passed an act abrogating these 370 obligations. Now, if you think of the UN is here, UN is not here, MIA is here. If it is an issue with the UN, let the UN react. We are part of the UN. Our views will be reflected in the UN Assembly. So we expect, if the issue is still alive for the UN, It's for them to answer. They should take it up. And once it is done in that assembly there at the UNG or security, wherever, we'll have our own role or views expressed there. So for now, I think both these issues are developing too early. One is developing, other has been developed for many years, but now at this moment, it's entirely with the UN, not with us. So we'll wait for the UN to react. And with India, it's our neighbor, and our neighbor, the values of neighborliness or friendship is of a long-term nature. And we'll be in touch with them bilaterally. I'm sure our government is in touch with them bilaterally. If there are issues which need to be settled between us, we'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Foreign Secretary.
Sir, on this,
You might want to speak to this.
sir, on the two issues raised by our distinguished participants, I'm not going to respond. I think the minister has already given you a broad parameters as to how we are looking at it. Let me share our views on some of the other issues. Thank you very much, Lord Brown, for your very eloquent presentations, as usual, like your book on the whole issues. And I have read it, so I know how you look at SDGs and other issues. I think he started off with a lot of optimism, and then gradually, after listening to the crowd, became cautiously optimistic. Am I correct in saying that, sir? Yes. Because I think what has happened over the years, that yes, there is no alternative to UN, but there are other space where you can also discuss, decide on broader global issues. So let me see how we, as Bangladesh, look at it. We have a strong relations, huge support for the UN and its affiliated body, and it goes back to as late as 1974, when our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, after Bangladesh's entry into the UN in the same month, had a speech at the UNGA. And let me read as to what he said in 1974 about UN, and how much confidence and faith that he attached to the UN as a multilateral body. And I quote, "In a world that is marked by strife and human misery, the United Nations remains the focus of man's hope for the future. Despite many difficulties and obstacles placed in its way, the United Nations, during more than a quarter century of its existence, has significantly contributed towards human progress in the political, economic, social, and cultural fields." Unquote. So you see that back in 1974, he had a huge faith, and when, as a country, we just came out of a 9 months long struggle and trying to put our business together. This is how he tried to put UN in the whole affairs. And our Iftikhar sir has already shared, and also our Honorable Minister, as to how Bangladesh was benefited by the UN. Now, sir, I'll take 2-3 minutes. If you want to look at the relationship between the UN and Bangladesh, you have to look at Bangladesh first. The character of the state, the chemistry of the people, the emotions, aspirations of the people, as Iftikhar said, had rightly pointed out. Now, Bangladesh, being a relatively small country and a nation in the midst of rather big nations, had always attached huge importance to multilateralism. Even when we started off our struggle, in fact, despite the fact it was Kolkata where our first mission was established, but it is UN where we actually marshaled our campaign during the War of Liberation, and there are books written on it. So from then on, we have always attached huge importance to UN within the context of multilateralism, and that continues. I think there could be hiccups here and there, not that we always, as Lord Brown has rightly pointed out, too optimistic. We can always be cautiously optimistic, about UN's role, and that's a global reality that no way should be read as our less faith on UN. I think in that sense, we have no alternative, as our Honorable Minister has pointed out. Now, over the year, UN has also changed. The way Bangladesh has changed. Bangladesh, from a rather the receiving end, has moved onto a giving end. We have given a lot of things to UN, not only in terms of our humble financial contribution, but our political contribution to the norm setting. Currently, I can share with you that UN is into a negotiation where they would like to have a new regime to look at the sea beyond 200 nautical mile. And Bangladesh is one of the major players in that norm setting now. Now that we realize how important it is for us to have a fair governing regime for ocean, we have put a huge importance onto the whole norm setting exercise in the ocean system. Not only that, and Iftikhar Sir is here, Bangladesh has always been instrumental in the peace building exercises, both in the Commission and the others. Not only contributing peace, but also creating a new architecture of peace building and peacekeeping. You'll be very happy to know that we are almost on the verge of establishing and launching a peace building center in addition to our peacekeeping center, BIPSOT, in Dhaka, with the help of Norway and Japan, where we are planning to build the capacity of our people to be able to engage in the peacekeeping, peace building operation beyond military role. So that's how we are looking at it. So Bangladesh has moved into that, both in terms of norm setting exercises and also implementing some of the issues. I'll just give you one example. In the MDG, we were a little behind, realizing that how we go about it. But in the SDG front, we have been ahead of others. In fact, we have been identified by UN as pioneer in testing some of the hypotheses that has been put into the SDGs. And I'll not go into that, but and that is why often we are called as a development model. One particular thing that I seek explain sort of a clarification from Lord Malik Brown is he said Bangladesh is a middle power. Not that we were not thinking about it, but I would like to know. And he used, sir, you used two issues in describing Bangladesh. One is the soft power and one is the middle power. Are you looking at it as a kind of a complementary to each other, or you're trying and giving a different description narrative to Bangladesh? Because this will also help placing Bangladesh into the UN in future. I will just finish with one idea, that there was a time when we had only UN as an international space where states could go and discuss their problem, issues, and challenges and priorities. But we see over the years, we have for international justice, ICC, ICJ, which has independently being developed. We have WTO, World Economic Forum, as a space where we can discuss broader economic issues. It is not only UN. We have also INGOs. INGOs has, some of the INGOs are almost as big as UN bodies. So they have a huge space to discuss social issues, especially related to human suffering. Then we have, on the peacekeeping and wartime situation, Red Cross and Red Crescent, which is outside UN and creating more new spaces, and our Red Cross and Red Crescents are taking up issues which they haven't in the past. Unlike Second World War or First World War. So UN is under huge competition, both from the international private organizations, from INGOs, and from some of the bodies that is being developed. So if the whole issue of accountability comes in, where we go? For political retreat, we go to UN. But when it comes to really taking on international accountability, we go to ICC and ICJ. So This is how I think the future looks like, and Bangladesh would like to continue to remain active in both areas. But our friendship, as our honorable minister has rightly pointed out, is rock solid. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have the final three speakers on my list, and they'll take the floor in this order. I have Mr. Mukammal Haq, I have General Muniruzzaman, and I have Professor Dilara Chaudhry. So we will go in. Zia, okay, were you raising your hand for yourself? Or I thought, all right, then we have Barrister Ziaur Rahman. So the fourth, but not the least, as you will find out when he asks his question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must first felicitate Lord Malloch Brown. We have heard a lot about him. I followed him when he was the Deputy Secretary General, but I didn't know that he travels on all sides of the world, whether it's UN or British politics. Most of us doesn't know he's a member of the Privy Council, which is the highest body one can be a member of. He also equally travels in the areas of economics, development, small states, and various other issues which he mentioned. It was a proud privilege to listen to him, and I must thank and congratulate the Cosmos Foundation, particularly its chairman. I was supposed to be negotiating some problems with a gentleman almost as old as mine. So I am an octogenarian, so I'm not young anymore. But I forgot completely when Inayatullah Khan rang me up around 9:30 and ordered me to come here. So, but I must try to give my comments briefly on three aspects. Number one is the UN. UN is the hope of the world. UN was formed when I was a school student. Just left Calcutta and went to Bhola, back to my place, and I was a student. And we looked at with wonder, what is UN and what is going to happen? We saw its development, we followed it, and we were very hopeful. Still now we are hopeful. But I have seen as an old man, UN prospers when there are good leaders internationally in the major capitals of the world, including the United States. I would like to elaborate on this. You all know much better than me because there are very many very competent people here around the table from all walks of life. But UN is now, as Lord Malloch Brown has mentioned, is now itself is in trouble because of very many reasons. We didn't go into those. It goes into those from time to time. As I said, we went into the palaces of the League of Nations when he used to go to Geneva, where Mr. Chaudhry was a very distinguished ambassador and permanent representative to the United Nations. And we had visited the new accommodations of the UN in New York and other places like Washington also. So our problem is we have now graduated, and I must thank Lord Malloch Brown for identifying us as might be already or might be leading towards a middle level country in the world. It's not simply on World Bank terms, it's on political and social terms, which distinguished Nobel laureate like Professor Amartya Sen has said that we are doing much better than India so far as social indicators are concerned. We must take into those things into our consideration when we talk about the UN and also about a relationship vis-a-vis the Rohingyas, and also the upcoming problem of the so-called Bangladeshis living in India. But I think, Mr. Chairman, the balloon has already exploded because there was a theory that between 30 million plus Bangladeshis are living in India. And there was a theory that most of them live in Assam. Now it has come into the latest NRC that it's only about 1.9 million, where many of the MLAs have been included, many distinguished, award-winning military officers who had served the country well have been is out of the NRC, and there are very many questions about the veracity of the NRC. Ex-president's grandson has been. We saw one lady, very old and extremely respectable, said that my children, my grandchildren, everyone has been included, but I have not been included. Now, that theory has exploded because only about 600,000 Muslims have been found, and 1.1 million Hindus have been found. I'm sure not a single Hindu will return to Bangladesh. Even if they try to push, there will be huge political problem in India itself. I mean, we don't have to tackle them, they have to tackle those things. These are theories, political theories for political gimmicks, I would say, for certain short-term political ends which backfires later on. We must remember those things very clearly. So coming to Rohingyas, Mr. Chairman, I'm an ex-deputy commissioner of Chittagong. I served there as an additional deputy commissioner, as a deputy commissioner. I went back in 1990 as the zonal relief coordinator, where a cyclone had killed about 200,000, an area where Lord Malloch Brown had worked for a long time, and he knows refugees and rehabilitation very well. And I know it that Cox's Bazar was a very sparsely populated place because of its nature. You were SDU there, were you? Oh yes, yeah. We were with the right person. It's very sparsely populated. Its population was less than 500,000. I'm talking about the late 60s. Now it has increased, but even then, Cox's Bazar has the highest range of what we call reserve forests, where the elephants used to come and go from Myanmar and all. That socio-economic milieu has been completely disturbed. I'm sorry, Lord Malloch Brown, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Mukammel Haq. I'm a former secretary to the government of Bangladesh. For some time, I was seconded to the Commonwealth Secretariat to serve about 6 years in the 80s. And I'm also involved with underprivileged children's education program. We educate about 50,000 boys and girls, mostly underprivileged, around the country, primarily on the urban side, really. Now, you see, Cox's Bazar problem is it is destabilizing our entire Cox's Bazar society. And through the, mind you, when in 2 years back when they came, Bangladeshis embraced them with open arms, along with our Honorable Prime Minister. And now the Cox's Bazar people don't want them. So what do you do in such a social situation? Forget about the politics. United Nations has been very supportive of Bangladesh always. Let us remember that this issue started in Bangladesh in 1978. This is not the first entry of the Rohingyas. The Myanmaris have been sending these Rohingyas since long, and then even came to us, helped us, and we could send most of them back. Only about 200 or 300,000 were retained here. Now it's a real huge problem with more than 1.1 million Rohingyas there. They are also using the what you call the mobile phones and also as a conduit of what we call the drugs coming in mostly from Myanmar. Now, the last point I would like to make is about the future of the United Nations. we are really all very worried, honestly. We are those who are old. I can assure Lord Malice Brown, in this room is extremely pro-British, because most of us have been educated there, in our schools, in colleges, universities. And I didn't have the privilege to go to Cambridge, but I went to London School of Economics, which I think to my own liking. I did go there and did my postgraduate there. So we are all British. But 10 years hence, if you come, I think the American educated will take over. And you won't have such friendly atmosphere then probably. We are really worried because I think we should all support UN in a very big way. And UN must evolve like other institutions, like the World Bank has to evolve. But UN, its Security Council did an exceptional thing for Bangladesh. The Security Council, most of its members came down for the Rohingyas. And Britain gave us unstinted support. We are very grateful to them for that. And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Spoken. We have two more. We have three more, actually. We have, very quickly, General Munir-uz-Zaman, Professor Dilara Chaudhry, and Barrister Ziaur Rahman. General?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Munir-uz-Zaman. I head a security think tank called Bangladesh Institute of Peace and Security Studies. I have two short questions. The first one is to the keynote speaker. I see that in the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on US peacekeeping, it calls for a new type of peacekeeping which is more hybrid and with a heavy emphasis on peace building. It also calls for greater partnership between the UN and regional bodies. So in that sort of a format, what sort of fusion do you see that the UN agencies will participate in the new form of peacekeeping, which can be called the fourth generation of peacekeeping? What will be the components like UNDP getting involved in what manner? How will be women integrated in those kind of peacekeeping? So I would like some clarity of thought on that. And the second question goes to the Foreign Secretary. I would still like to know some sort of clarity of the Foreign Office on NRC, because this is not a secret issue. This was an agenda of the ruling regime in India, that these are essentially Bangladeshis and they should be pushed back. We have extremely bitter experience of the Rohingya influx coming into Bangladesh, and I would still think that we have to be on a proactive platform. Are we raising this issue bilaterally with our friend India? Are we alerting international agencies like the UN and our international friends? Because in the case of the Rohingya issue, none of our big friends stood with us. They all went against Bangladesh's interest. So what is the Foreign Office thinking and doing about it?
Thank you. Professor Dilara Chaudhry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor. I am going to make comments on about two aspects. If you allow me, and very humbly I'm requesting you to give me permission, that I disagree with the Honorable Minister, that there is something called eternal friendship in international relations. There is no eternal friend, there is no eternal enemy, there is only eternal national interest. And this I'm talking in the context of what is happening in Assam. Taking the cue from Mr. Masoom Choudhury and General Munir-uz-Zaman, the developments which are taking place in Assam are, this is least to say, is worrisome. Because within these 120 days, these legal formalities will be over. And according to the latest report in the newspaper, the Assam government has already started building what is called the camps or the prisons, where these people will be kept. And there is no reason to have any satisfaction or consolation that most of them are Hindus. the Hindus will never be pushed into Bangladesh. That's not the policy of the present government. Because present government of India is believe in Hindutvadi, and they think that India should be a state, a country only for the Hindus. And there is a bill, National Citizen Bill, which is pending in the Rajya Sabha, which can be easily changed, and it clearly says that Hindus coming from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, after being persecuted in those countries, they would be given their citizenship immediately. So we should worry about the 6 lakhs Muslims, and India calls them Bangladeshi Muslims. And there is also no way, there is no reason to be for satisfaction that in that list of Muslims there are high-ranking officials. If you look at Myanmar, and I agree with Mr. Masoom Chaudhary that, India should not take any exception. This is something which may go against our interest. So we should keep United Nations informed about it and the other powers. Because if we take the lesson for what happened to the Rohingyas in Myanmar, Bangladesh government, successive government, I'm not talking about only the present government, the successive governments in Bangladesh remained completely oblivious about what was happening in Myanmar. This planned ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya started with the military takeover. Before that, the Rohingyas, they were ministers, they were parliamentary members, there were high-ranking Rohingyas who were interacting with the mainstream community. So, when the planned ethnic cleansing started, Bangladesh should have taken note of it. Even that much lauded 1999 repatriation agreement, the Rohingyas were sent back as the residents of Myanmar. By that, the Rohingyas had lost their nationality, their citizenship, and their recognition that Rohingya is an ethnic group in Myanmar, which was the case before this planned ethnic cleansing started. Rohingyas were recognized as one of the ethnic groups of Myanmar. So they were taken, their citizenship were taken, their identity as the Rohingya was taken. Bangladesh took no note of it. And then the Kofi Annan, much lauded Kofi Annan report, Suu Kyi made sure that in the Kofi Annan report, the word Rohingya is not mentioned, only the Muslim. And Bangladesh did not raise any objection to that. So, what I'm trying to say is that about the NRC thing in Assam, let us not be very complacent, like we had been in case of the development about the Rohingyas in Myanmar. And second thing is the relevance of United Nations for Bangladesh. When United Nations was created, there were great hopes because big powers, the allies, they all agreed that this will be a world government and that this government's main job will be to prevent conflicts and prevent human rights abuse within the countries as well, internal abuse of the human rights. So there were great hopes about this, but then there was this question of sovereignty. And the hope was that this sovereignty thing will sort of melt down a little bit. And the United Nations will have greater role about the internal activities of the government, like a state government, like Myanmar. From 2012, they were systematically actually driving the Rohingyas away from their homeland through a lot of brutalities and army actions. The United Nations couldn't do anything about it. And not only that, I'm very sorry to say, a lady representative of United Nations in Myanmar, just 1 minute, Myanmar, actually, another thing I have discovered in Bangladesh, you give more time to the men. When we go to a seminar and we want to talk, and you give more time to the men than to the women. Yeah. always, I have seen that I will be always, asked to stop. But no man has ever seen asked to stop. But anyway, I'm not stopping, but let me finish. But here, I would like to say that a lady representative, United Nations representative, did not give report to the United Nations that such brutalities were taking place in Myanmar. So United Nations relevance, we are talking about the peacekeeping. The peacekeeping is post-conflict scenario. And in that area, the United Nations has achieved a lot. And Bangladesh is also benefiting from that. Besides, getting praise from all over the world, the army is also getting very happy about it. So we are also happy. But the point is, the United Nations is also supposed to prevent the conflict within human rights abuse and conflict within the state and interstate conflict. But so far, United States, I see, is a captive of these 5 security big powers. China, Russia. So why should we not go for bilateralism? It is better to go for bilateralism. It is better to go and beg China to solve our problem. It is better to go and beg India and Russia because the United Nations is helpless. Only the other day in the 3rd committee, when this issue was raised that Bangladesh would like to take this to the International Court of Criminal Justice, China immediately said no. And that was the end of it. So, Honorable Lord George Brown, I would like to say that United States has not been able to keep up with the changing international order and what was happening about this sovereignty question. And as a result, for Bangladesh at least, I really do not see that much of a relevance besides the other development, trade and all that. But when it comes to protect the conflicts or interest relevance, but and that may become, the decline of United Nations become even more profound if the United States does not really take up its proper role. Thank you.
Thank you. Barrister Ziaur Rahman, you might want to ask a leading question as a barrister, and you will. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to revert to the topic that appears above Mr. Chairman's head, that it is the relevance of the United Nations and a prognosis for partnership. Now, our keynote speaker mentioned a very interesting quote from a former Secretary General, I believe, that you cannot change the wind, but you can bend the sails. Very salutary advice. Very interesting advice. But this must not become a habit, which I suspect is becoming with the United Nations. They are bending the sail, and the other word that has frequently been used today has been reboot. Now, reboot is an interesting word, but there are powers that are trying to boot the United Nations out completely. As we've seen in recent years, that as in 2003, for instance, in the prelude to the Iraq war, we see the games being played with the United Nations, and I believe Mr. Kofi Annan in private did express his sorrow that he was not really consulted. It might have been mentioned to him, but he wasn't really consulted that they were preparing to go to war in Iraq. One-sided war. The UN has, over the years, had its powers clipped, influence whittled away, and it's, on the one hand, the United Nations itself is probably allowing its powers to be taken away by choosing a line of least resistance, which is why it is often ignored or bypassed by several big and small powers. And when I said small powers, I meant not really small, but small in size. That's Israel. With impunity, the last 60 years or 70 years, Israel has done whatever it felt like. And it has always been endorsed, passed, and allowed to happen. Even today, we can see entire West Bank areas being demolished. The entire Palestinian area is being taken over by the Israelis, and no one can squeak against Israel. It has become that powerful. and the United Nations seems to have surrendered to the inevitable. I remember that more than 60 years ago, not that I remember, I read, because I wasn't there that time, President Kennedy is supposed to have said that he will make efforts, or when he said it meant the United States, would make efforts to prevent the United Nations from becoming merely a forum for invective. Invective. Well, today it has become a forum for invective. And it is allowing itself to become a forum for invective because all that's happening around the world, there are times when you feel that the United Nations is also an observer, maybe an interested observer, but an observer, not a participant, not an active, involved participant. So, and the world today, one can see, is littered with unsolved problems. These problems were the job of the United Nations to settle, and it has remained unsettled, and it has been allowed to gather dust. For instance, just two would suffice, I think, the Palestinians and the Kashmiris. 60, 70, 80 years, based on the premise, I think the United Nations based itself on the premise that if you stick your head in the sand, everything will disappear once you've got your head out of it. But it doesn't disappear, and it has been left for future generations. And the United Nations' avowed objective of setting up the United Nations was to prevent future generations or preserve future generations from the horrors of war, from the scourge of war. They've not been able to do it. They've failed in that. And today it seems, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say this, it seems that there are selective attitudes to the solutions that they intend to tackle, the United Nations. Because we cannot forget the rush they made towards solving the East Timor problem. That was something they had to solve. And that was a relatively new problem. But there are 60, 70-year problems littering the world, remain unsolved, remain under the radar so far as the United Nations is concerned. So over here, one has to decide whether the relevance of the United Nations must take these things into consideration. That is it at all relevant for any particular nation, group, country, association, etc.? Where is the relevance of the United Nations today? It is not playing an active role. It is, as I said, a sort of an interested observer in many respects. And then we come to the question of prognosis of partnership. It is better that you use the word prognosis and not diagnosis, because the United Nations is heading in a direction where diagnosis may be called for very shortly. Because it is, if it continues in this manner, as Lord Brown mentioned, that the League of Nations failed in less than 20 years, the United Nations has now become a dinosaur, because it's 75 years old or 70 years old. It's becoming a dinosaur. We do not wish it to disappear as a dinosaur, disappear in the sands of time or disappear into the sunset. If it has to be the only means of settling disputes in the world today, because again I refer to a former president who said when the instruments of war have far outspaced the instruments of peace. So the world is a dangerous place. We all say this. At every forum, people are speaking and saying that the world has become a dangerous place, and no one wants to do anything about it. And it is because of that, the United Nations today should, as I said, reboot or take a look at itself once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We are coming to the end of our deliberations. Now, we will end in this manner, and this is what the chair has programmed for the rest of you the next 15 minutes. I'll give the floor to the minister. He would like to talk 3 minutes, but he will do so in Bengali. I'll translate it for Lord Mark Malloch Brown during lunch, I hope. So he'll make thereafter I'll give you the floor for your five-minute intervention, and then I'll wrap it up with chairs.
বেশি সময় নিব না, অবশ্যই বেশি সময় নিব না।
Okay.
আমার গণমাধ্যমের বন্ধুদের কাছ থেকে অনুরোধ এসছে বাংলায় কিছু বলার জন্য, দরকার হয়েছে। প্রথম যেটা আমাদের বার্তা হলো, আমাদের সরকার জাতিসংঘকে অত্যন্ত রেলিভেন্ট, প্রয়োজনীয় মনে করে। 1 নম্বর প্রশ্ন। আমাদের সরকার জাতিসংঘের কাছ থেকে অনেক উপকার পেয়েছে। সহায়তা পেয়েছে। বিশেষ করে জাতিসংঘে আমাদের যে ভূমিকা শান্তিরক্ষী আমরা, সেখানে আমাদের বিশাল ভূমিকা রয়ে গেছে। বিশেষ করে এমডিজি এসডিজি দুইটি উন্নয়নের যে প্রোগ্রাম আছে, সেখানে জাতিসংঘের কাছ থেকে আমরা অনেক অনেক উপকার পাচ্ছি। সুতরাং জাতিসংঘ অবশ্যই প্রয়োজন এবং জাতিসংঘে আমরা অ্যাক্টিভলি আমরা পার্টিসিপেট করবো, কারণ আমাদের মাননীয় প্রধানমন্ত্রী, আমাদের মূল নীতি হলো সকলের সঙ্গে বন্ধুত্ব, কারোর সঙ্গে খুঁচিয়ে আমরা শত্রুতা সৃষ্টি করব না, এবং প্রতিটি ক্ষেত্রে আমরা ধৈর্যের পরিচয় দিব। বাইলেটারালি চেষ্টা করব, মাল্টিলেটারালি চেষ্টা করব, সরাসরি কথা বলবো, জাতিসংঘের মাধ্যমে কথা বলবো, কিন্তু আমরা অসহিষ্ণু হব না। আমরা প্রতিটি ব্যাপারে আমরা সহিষ্ণুতার প্রদর্শন করব। শেষ কথা আমি যেখানে বলতে চাই, ডক্টর দিলারা চৌধুরী একটা মন্তব্য আমার কথার উপরে বলেছেন, ফ্রেন্ডশিপ ইজ ইটার্নাল। হ্যাঁ, ফ্রেন্ডশিপ ইজ ইটার্নাল বিকজ ফ্রেন্ডশিপ গ্রোজ ইন ইটার্নাল নেইবারহুড. Neighborhood is eternal. It is created by nature. We can't change our neighbors. Look at Europe. There for thousands of wars, millions have lost their lives. They're still living together as good friends and great friends. That is one great lesson in front of us. In that context, kindly, Lady Mananiya Professor Dr. Dilara Chaudhary, please understand my statement that friendship is eternal, should be understood in the context of eternal neighborhood. That is what is my statement. Thank you very much.
5 minutes or so?
5 minutes. Just first, go back to this point of middle power, which Foreign Secretary raised. I mean, middle power is not a formal, in a sense, nomenclature, but I think it reflects, is the appropriate label for a country which, is a leader in different fields. And where is Bangladesh a leader? It's a leader in various areas of soft power, including this remarkable domestic INGO tradition, because that's particularly what BRAC now is. I think I'm right in saying that BRAC is the world's largest NGO, and it is Bangladeshi. But it's about the global responsibilities that a country accepts. And so, despite all the controversy that surrounds the Rohingya, the fact is Bangladesh has, on behalf of the global community, provided home and asylum to that population. And in so doing is a leader in the world in terms of its generosity towards refugees. There are then all the more traditional things that we've mentioned, from its leadership in development, where under the SDGs it is a pioneer, to its contribution to peacekeeping, etc. So, but along with the basic assets of a country of 165 million, rapidly moving up the league table in terms of size of GDP versus other countries. So, I use the term middle, with perhaps, a little bit forward leaning in saying it, but I think the direction is clear, and I say it with the greatest respect. The second thing is, I also accept that there are other fora than the UN today. The Red Cross, Red Crescent was mentioned, the ICC. But, an awful lot of these still require the legal sort of infrastructure and the political support of the UN to survive as a system. The ICC in certain parts of the world at the moment looks in significant jeopardy. And in fact, it will be really devolved to the UN and the Security Council to protect the Treaty of Rome, which established that organization, because it is, in real difficulty at the moment. And let me, in that regard, just, a number of points have been raised about whether the UN is a dinosaur. I would just, as a point of anthropology, observe that usually it takes a little longer than 75 years to become a dinosaur. A few more zeros. But I think, I was struck by the lady's I thought, in a way, her debating proposition, let's beg as a bilateral for China to help us, versus what I think everybody in the room is really saying, which is let's be a proud partner of others in a multilateral system. You know, beggar or partner, take your choice. I think, you know, the point is clear. In a world of no laws and bilateral power, where a China or United States is untrammeled in what they can do, still a Bangladesh becomes a beggar. In a country of rules and multilateral frameworks, Bangladesh is a proud partner, and I think, you know, that is, if you like, the core issue. Is the UN riven with double standards? Yes. I mean, you know, as the number 2 in the UN under Kofi Annan, he and I struggled continuously with the issue of Israel and the special dispensations it's received from the Security Council over the years. But again, the UN is about the art of the possible, not the art of the perfect. It's about trying to move towards universal standards and their application. And that's where, again, just as the leadership of the Swedes have been so important in the past, having a Bangladesh and others join them as champions of a reformed UN which treats all fairly and equally is, I think, a goal that, you know, is something for Bangladesh to aspire to for itself and for the United Nations. Does finally the UN have its head in the sand? Well, certainly yes. But I would say this about conflicts. Having been involved in the resolution of some of them as Kofi Annan's deputy, conflicts are, the resolution of conflicts is all about timing. Years can go by and the time is not right. Then a sudden circumstance or influx set of events creates the moment to resolve conflicts. And I think the key thing of UN leadership is about not expending all your powder when you're not going to get results, but preserving it for when you can. And I think, you know, great Secretary Generals have been quite good at doing that. But, you know, I finish in the sense where I began, which is the UN is only the sum of its member states. It's not some independent body with huge authority of its own. Its capacity is the treaties on which it is based, the network of conventions and treaties, and its ability to get member states to live by them and honor them and respect them. But, you know, ultimately, the UN is as good as its member states will allow it to be. And we're in a difficult period where some very powerful member states are constraining the UN more than at any time since we have seen since the Cold War. And that, far from a reason for Bangladesh walking away from the UN, should be a reason for the Bangladeshis of the world to redouble their commitment and step up to protect a UN that big powers aren't protecting.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I will bring the deliberations symposium to a close. But by beginning where you left off, Mark, yes, it's true that UN is the sum of its past, the nation states. But there is also, it's very important to remember that there is no one single UN. There is the UN of the Secretariat, of which Mark was a part. There is the Secretary General, there is the Deputy Secretary General, the Under-Secretaries General, and the whole shoot. That's one UN. The other is the member states. Member states, you and I, the General Assembly, where everyone, 193 represented. There is a UN of the big powers, I mean, who call the shots. That's the Security Council, you see? There are the specialized agencies. I mean, some of them predate the United Nations itself. So when we speak of the UN, we do not speak of a single identity. The UN is a collection of aspirations, of thoughts, of institutions, of treaties, as you said, and all that. you see, we learn from the past. I mean, many of you have read, I'm sure, Edward Hallett Carr's Between the Two Wars. I mean, he was a teacher at Aberystwyth. He was a British diplomat, I think. I mean, the whole idea that if you go ahead of your times, you see, you fail. If you take on the big powers, you will fail. So that is a problem. One of the sad rules of reality in the global system is, or global order, is that just because there are problems, just because there are issues, it does not mean there are solutions. Which is why we have issues and solutions which penned resolution for decades. Zia, you mentioned Kennedy a couple of times. Remember, he had also said that, well, if he were alive, he would have probably said that ask not what the UN can do for you, ask what you can do for the United Nations. So that is it. So the UN is something that's out there. One of the reasons, I had a mentor called Hedley Bull. Hedley Bull, to many, is the father of what's called the Anglo-Saxon School of International Relations. He was master at Balliol, and Balliol is where all these gentlemen they have this quiet assurances of effortless superiority. Hedley was one of those. He didn't write too many books. He wrote one called the Anarchical Society. And his thesis was something like this. I mean, this is too much of a simplification. Of course, we talk about United Nations because there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of literature about the United Nations. But he thought the entire purpose of this society of states, if you are not to be anarchical, and his book was entitled Anarchical Society, is to create a culture where you set up these club rules that I spoke of initially. So more important than institutions are the club rules of where states would operate with one another. And if you can do it in a way that you find the kind of interactions on the matrix of the global system mutually rewarding and beneficial. Is that too much to ask for? I don't think so. It's not too high an aspiration. There's an English poet, Robert Browning, who's very well read in these parts. I don't know if he said it or Tacitus did at the beginning, that man's reach should exceed his grasp. What else are the heavens for? I thank you. I'll bring this to a close. I want to thank Mr. Inatullah Khan for being such an excellent host, sir. You have laid on a tremendous event, and you are keeping us engaged in these interactions, and the kind of aspiration that, again, you have of what you call the architecture of intellectual infrastructure. It may not be finished, but we're going ahead with it. Thank you very much. And I want to thank finally all the participants for being here and
the panelists.
And the panel, of course, our participants, panel chair included, for the efforts and for an extremely stimulating conversation. This is something that we would give a lot to have in Singapore. We do, of course, but this is very unique in many sense. Thank you, Minister, for being here. The problem with ministers speaking at events such as this is that in the Commonwealth, as you know, we have such a thing as joint ministerial responsibility. You cannot speak for yourself. You have to speak for the committee of which you are a part. It's a cabinet. There is a government, but you have made it very clear in the beginning that you speak not as a minister, but as an individual. And that is what every participant in a symposium is meant to do. Mark, thanks very much for being here. I know under what constraints you are here. You will be busy on Monday. You were busy on Friday, and we were communicating like mad from Singapore, between Singapore and London, as to what is happening with Brexit. We hope that everything will end in a way that is satisfactory to all of us, and that is also rewarding for those who are friends of Britain. Thank you very much, and the symposium is now over, except for any final housekeeping remark that you wish to make.
Yes,
thank you.
and a big round of applause for Lord Brown and for our Honorable Planning Minister, Mr. M.M. Nunn, and for Dr. Iftikhar Chowdhury. Let's give a big round of applause. Now, Nabila's, you have to make some announcements.
Yes, thank you. That was a very informative session, and thank you for your presence and your great questions. Now, lunch will be served downstairs in the Lakeshore restaurant. So follow our team. Thank you. Enes bhai.